Hello, everybody. It's Friday. It's midday or just about, and that means it's Wow Ergonomics. Thank you for coming along and joining us, whatever it is that you're doing at this moment in time. Unless you're meant to be getting that report out for the manager, in which case you're being very naughty, and we'll just apologise on your behalf later on. You'll notice that Stephen isn't here with me today because he's busy. He always does that. He just does things occasionally where he's busy and can't come. But we have the wonderful Twyla, who works for Backer, here on his behalf, not as a replacement, but as a kind of completely different entity to bring a new flavour to the show. And we've got a special guest today, Bernard Crouch. Thank you for joining us
Hi.
as well, Bernard. So, because both of you are fairly new to this arena, it might be worth starting with you saying a little bit about yourself. So, Twyla, I know you have been on once before, but just for people that haven't really got to know you yet, say a little bit about you.
I'm Twyla, and I've been with Bacher for about a year and a half. And I live in London. And what more can I say?
Well, come on, that's not the sum of your past. I work for Backer and I live in London. I know you love music. So talk about that for 2 seconds. So you love music.
Mhm.
Yeah. What got you into music?
Well,
What kind of music? What kind of music are you listening to at the moment?
Oh, geez. I've been into Afrobeat just recently. And a friend of mine from back home turned me on to the Merle Haggard Fest, which is like this huge Americana country kind of festival, kind of like WOMAD.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, some of the stuff coming out of that is just simply amazing. You know, all the fusion and even some of the traditional stuff and some folk. Haven't been doing much.
And now we're getting the real Twilight. You see, she's really warming up.
I can't make a decision. There's no one genre.
There you go. Bernard, tell us a little bit about you, sir.
Hi, yeah. So I've been doing what I'm doing as a facility management consultant and workplace as well for the last it's kind of almost 20 years now, and I've worked with a wide variety of clients both in the UK and overseas on many varied and different projects. And I think it's fair to say that I particularly enjoy, I enjoy going out and meeting people and dealing with issues and so on. I found COVID and lockdown a very depressing time, which I was very glad when it was over, because I felt like I'd been put in solitary confinement or something. I became a granddad about a week ago, so I've got
Congratulations.
a little boy, Zane, who is now beginning to properly open his eyes, and it will slowly, hopefully, develop from just being sleep, eat, feed, and repeat.
Oh no! Come on, his parents must be wanting him to stay sleepy feed. I mean, that's kind of.
Well, I think they want him to sleep more than 2 or 3 hours at a go. To be honest, that's
exactly.
That's probably the key. But So and I recently helped them to both move house and did some decorating with them, got the nursery all prepped up and so on. So I've been doing a few things like that.
Cool. I want to talk to you a little bit in a minute about facilities management, because some people might not actually understand what that is or involves, etc. So I think we need to unpack that. I'm going to start by saying, now you must love white, because look at that room. That room is, like when you see these films where they depict sort of like heaven and hell, and they walk into a room and it's completely white. That's that room. So are you in heaven right now, or you?
Lord of FM is what it is.
I'm in the warmest room where the sun is shining.
It's brilliant. Well, I love it. I'm an admirer of the whiteness of that room. That really does it for me. So tell people, if people don't really understand what facilities management is, what is it?
So every single building that isn't your house, isn't your home where you live, pretty much every other single building, presuming it's got, it's not a ruined castle or something, will have a facilities manager or similar, and his or her team looking after that building. So when you go into hospital, when you go to school, college, university, hopefully not, but if you went to prison, government buildings, private sector buildings, obviously office buildings, all of them have somebody carrying out that role, and that person's role is to make sure that those premises are clean, secure, safe, and increasingly, having already mentioned lockdown, increasingly since lockdown, there's been a big emphasis on making the workplace more desirable to get people back in and not just be working from home every day. So that's quite a positive thing. I think there's a trend there where it's like we'll up the food offering, we'll make the whole environment perhaps a bit greener, with biophilics, so putting living plants into the workplace, making the layouts better, giving more options in terms of different spaces where you can work. So yes, you're right. It's something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. I'm at a dinner party and I say I do facilities management, and one person will know, the other person will go, well, what's that then? I have no idea. And as a consultant, I'm then going and advising clients on various aspects of all the things I just mentioned.
Yeah, it covers quite a gamut, doesn't it? It covers quite.
Yes, it's very widespread. So in a very big organisation, there will be a separate health and safety manager, a workplace manager. The facilities manager is probably looking after some of the key services. So another way to explain that is that the key services in a building, if a giant picked the building up and shook it, everything that fell out will be the soft services, so the cleaning, security, the reception, the catering, and the hard services, which are pretty key in a building, the air conditioning, so heating, lighting, air conditioning, lifts, etc., would be the things that stay in the building. So that gives you a differentiation between a facilities manager who says they're hard services or they're soft services. Quite a few do both, but quite often there'll be one side where they're dealing with all the equipment side, as it were, and the other one with the softer elements of the building.
Now, you see, that's a hard job. That's a really hard job because you're dealing with people in that as well.
Yes.
And people are really, my key term for people, I almost want to drop the term ergonomic, right? We'll keep the term ergonomics, but the term ergonomic, I'd quite like to drop because it gets misused. But I'd like the term with people that they're messy, because I think human beings really are quite messy individuals to understand and quite difficult to understand. But Twyla, you must have had this as well. You go into any building and you even just go along one set of desks, and the opinions of the people along that one set of desks is, it's cold in here, it's hot in here, it's I need more air conditioning, I need less air conditioning, it's too noisy, it's not noisy enough, that makes it really hard. Yeah. So is a lot of it, is it about communication? Is it about negotiation, if you like? Is it about trying to bring people to a place of reconciliation around things?
Communication is really key, and one of the things I'm quite keen on is encouraging engineers. So the air conditioning engineer typically will quite often come into the space, have a look at what's going on, and go away to the plant room to make some adjustments, and then not actually tell any of the end users what they've just done, and what difference it's going to make. But because they've logged the job and this was the problem, this is what I did to resolve it, they're fine with that. So I'm very keen to encourage this sort of face-to-face engagement where we hopefully that engineer, that person will speak to the end users and say, well, the reason it's been too hot, too cold, whatever, but this is what I've done to resolve it. And I recently had it wasn't one of my clients, but a big occupier in the UK, lots of buildings, and they've now engaged with some, I don't know what you want to call them really, whether you call them unicorns or ninjas or whatever, but they're sort of an interface between the engineering teams and the end users, and they are doing that role of actually explaining, well, the reason the office was too hot on Monday was because of this, but this is what we've done and now it's fixed. And it is a big challenge, because when you plan the space and when you move people around, quite often the workstations aren't always going to be the way the building was originally intended. And as human beings, if you look at feng shui, for instance, the Chinese art of was kind of a well-being art, really. There are elements of that we should consider. So, for instance, if there's an air conditioning unit just behind me right now, I'm not going to be very comfortable. If it's just in front of me, I might be fine, because it's quite natural to have air coming down this way, and I'm going, that's nice. I like that. That's cool. Not on the back of my neck. No, that's going to make me uncomfortable. Or, as I'm actually saying here, having a door behind me, that's not a great layout either. Our preference internally would be to be facing the door and be able to see whoever's coming in or out. And of course, what happens is typically lots of planning's gone on for years and years, where it's squeeze more people in. Let's sweat the asset. Let's get let's get as many workstations in as we can, and then you end up with people understandably uncomfortable because they're sat somewhere that isn't really very pleasant for them, either because of the air conditioning or those reasons I just explained. So I have sympathy. I have sympathy for end users, and always I try and establish, well, are they just being difficult, or do they have a genuine grievance which hopefully we can resolve? I came across a case recently. I was working with a client where one man in the building put in more complaints on the help desk than almost everyone else put together. And I went and spoke to someone senior to try and get a bit of background on this. It turned out he'd been transferred from his role to a different role, turned down for promotion, and was just generally hacked off. So he would complain.
Soul.
Yes. So he was going on the help desk every other day, logging yet another complaint about something or another. And we're like, so for instance, one of the lifts was out of action. It's being serviced by the engineer. It'll be back up again in an hour or two. He logs a complaint. Why is the lift out of service? So yes, I think it's as I say, I quite like the approach of more communication and then establishing what's actually going on. And it could be, I mean, another instance was somebody who was very unhappy with their workstation, their layout and so on. It actually transpired when we drilled down that he'd got eyesight problems, which he didn't want to deal with, didn't want to go to an optician's, but kept getting headaches, was blaming the workstation. And it took a bit of diving into this to actually establish. We couldn't find anything wrong with his workstation. And money had been spent to make some improvements. He still had an issue. It turned out he needed to get along to the opticians and get some new specs. So it's all back to communication.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, that's something I write about quite a lot, because I work with Dan Williams from Visualize Training. I don't know whether you've come across him. And we've had multiple conversations about, especially when it comes to something like hearing loss or visual impairment, there's a whole element in there about kind of vocational rehabilitation as well as occupational health. So it's not, a lot of the time things don't get picked up because it's actually that the root cause of it starts before the office.
Yeah.
You know, for a lot of, Twyla, you might want to talk about that.
Well, I was just going to say, the reason I have some personal experience of this, because I had a very bad reaction to the second COVID jab, and I got one-sided, very painful tinnitus as a result, and ended up with hearing aids on both sides. And the number of people I meet that I now recognize have hearing problems, whether it's tinnitus or just actual hearing loss, that refuse to get hearing aids. Now, no one ever knows that I have hearing aids. Well, you can see it sticking out there. I'll have to put it back down. No one knows. And if they do, nobody cares. But people will, like the gentleman who refuses to get the eyeglasses, certainly there can be a cost associated with these things. But it's like, if I didn't have my glasses, I wouldn't be able to function, you know. It's like all of a sudden you hear things and you're like, wow, this is what the world is about. And, you know, it makes it easier for you to do everything. But people, particularly with hearing aids, are very, very resistant because they think, oh my gosh, I'm getting old. Well, you are getting old every day, so you might as well deal with it. But people won't do it. I've talked about 5 people in getting hearing aids, but it was not easy.
I think a big part of that, though, is there are certain things that we feel society and in particular our bosses at work or whoever will be okay with, and there are other things that we think if we put our hand up to this, we may be seen as potentially weak, and or we may be seen as potentially not able to do something, and therefore it's going to become an issue. And I don't want to really raise my hand above the parapet. And again, you know, with all the times I speak to Dan about this, that's often the case. People are actually quite often wanting to hide it because they're scared of what the organisation are going to think when they find out that they're losing their sight or they're losing their hearing.
I think that with the whole way that these types of, you know, if you need something extra, it's viewed as like, oh, that's okay for those people over there. They need that, but I'm like you're saying, I'm strong. I don't need that, and it's viewed because it's so associated with so-called disability. I think we need to unwrap that sort of thing, you know, because to get specialist equipment, quite often in some organizations, you need a diagnosis. You know, you need to go to a doctor. You need a thing instead of just saying to people, "What do you need to do the job?" as an individual, and rating whether or not that's appropriate or suitable, without actually classifying it as this thing that has a negative connotation to it. So we have to unwrap that societal negative connotation to assistance. You know, it's just like, you know, disability. Like we used to have curbs and stairs, and now we have ramps, and it's better for everyone. You know, if you design for the less able or whatever the current term is, it makes it better for everyone. So everyone should have access to what they need in a reasonable way.
I'm going to bring that back to Bernard with it again. This is actually where facilities management can actually really help with this, though, isn't it? Because if facilities management in with what they're doing actually make the building speak of inclusion, if they implement education around the environment and the processes and everything that are going on to the people that are using that building, then people feel that they can talk about it. It's when you get to like I can remember going into one office in London to do an assessment with someone, and I said, "Oh, so you need you need to make sure that you've got an evac chair here, right?" And they went, "What's one of those?" I said, "Well, actually, you've got one there." Oh, we've all talked about that. We all think that's a disabled thing. Like, okay, right, but there it was, right, that nobody really knew what this thing was at the top of a stairwell. It hadn't been talked about. It hadn't been, you know, that information hadn't really been disseminated properly. And had it been kind of, you know, explained and talked about more openly, etc., and who could use it, maybe, you know, the types of people that could use it, whatever, it would have been out in the open, and people wouldn't be scared of it. Do you agree?
I totally agree. And I guess so. One of the things I've found quite often is no peeps in place. So personal evacuation plans I don't know how. I've been to more than one, let's say, where I've gone into a client. I said, "So, can I see the peeps?" And they, "Well, what's that?" So it's a personal evacuation plan. Have you got any? Oh yeah, we've got we've got Joe. He's on the third floor. He uses a wheelchair. Or there's Laura. She broke her leg skiing. She's in a cast at the moment. Well, there needs to be a plan for those people to be able to get out properly and reasonably quickly if should there be a fire in the building. And it's kind of quite alarming that would still be the case. That I'm still finding buildings where that's the situation. The second string to that is that I was in a building where we had it's just recently been demolished, but it was a sort of a 70s office building, and it had two very narrow staircases, which meant that our normal planned evacuation could take quite a bit of time. And this particular time, it was especially slow. And I found the reason why was because one man was going down, he was shuffling down the steps one at a time and slowing the whole procedure up. And when I spoke to him, he said, "Oh, yeah, well, I've got a heart condition and I can't walk any faster." But he'd never told us about that. So we were completely unaware. So immediately we need to consider a peak for him and start to think, well, when anyone starts working in the building, we ought to be not just asking, do you have any mobility issues? But in his case, he didn't think he did. So in his case, I don't have a mobility issue. I've got a heart issue. So we needed to rethink the question we were asking to make sure that we could capture somebody who, again, probably didn't really want to. Well, he didn't want to call it he didn't consider himself to have a mobility issue, but he definitely did coming down from the sixth floor. So it's back to communication, isn't it?
Yeah. I think I'm going to give an example of probably one of the most mind-boggling examples I ever came across, which was at a very big business, a big corporate business, and somebody in a wheelchair who was on a management team who were looking at how they interact with customers in order to have their meetings, because the only staircase in the build, or the only way to the meeting room in the building was up a set of stairs, had to exit the building through a side door every time they had one of these management meetings, go round the outside of the building and up in a service lift, which really isn't for people anyway. Yeah. Right? Service lifts are for equipment, not for people to travel in, to get to this thing. And I was amazed for two reasons. One was that nobody had considered just moving it to one of the other meeting rooms at the front of the building. Secondly, I was amazed that a group of people that were concerned with how we interact with people had failed to notice that one of their own was being forced in all weathers to go outside and would arrive wet, cold, angry for meetings by having to traverse around the outside of the building. I mean, you must see things like this and just go, wow, where's the thinking here?
So one of the others where it hadn't been thought through was a man in a very sophisticated electric wheelchair. And when the fire alarm went off, he was taken out of the building in the evac chair. That all went very well. And now they're on the pavement at the muster point, and he's saying, "Well, how am I going to get home if we're not allowed? If we're not allowed back in the building, because that's my mode of transport." And realistically, I wouldn't have expected anyone to lift the wheelchair up, because with the batteries, it weighed about 230 kilos. So it's very heavy. It's a very heavy piece of kit. And at no point, it wasn't a building that I was directly involved with, but at no point had anyone ever considered, well, as far as they were concerned, because they've got the evac chair, job done. And nobody had ever considered, well, what happens if the fire alarm goes off and then he's no longer has his wheelchair, which is how he travels to and from, he travels from the building to a bus stop, gets on the bus, same at the other, but he can't do that without the wheelchair. So nobody had ever considered that. Luckily, there wasn't an actual fire, and he did get back into the building. But of course, it immediately raised that point of we need to consider. It needs to be considered how is this going to be dealt with in the future?
How did they resolve that?
Well, as I say, it wasn't the building that I managed, so I don't actually know how they resolved it. I suppose, arguably, there's an argument that the answer might have been to use the service lift, which was designated for firemen, but as I understand, that had never been considered as a route of egress. That was actually only for firemen to come up into the building. So I think that would probably have been the solution.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the answers are really simple, aren't they?
Yeah,
it's just that somebody needs to actually understand that there's a problem there in the first place, and communicate and talk through the problem in order to find the answer. I mean, sometimes it might be as simple as someone else will say, "Oh, yeah, actually, I've always got a wheelchair in the back of my car for some reason because I'm caring for somebody or whatever, and I can get that out."
The type of wheelchair he probably needed, because that's his wheelchair to get around his house and everything. So,
but in an emergency situation, if it would do, and it was feasible on that occasion, then it would.
Or send them home in a taxi, or I don't know. There's all kinds of things depending on what it is. But I imagine the loss of that wheelchair would have been just terrible for his life on a daily basis. Not going to function at all. Going to need people coming in because
Absolutely. Listen, I want to take us slightly away from the access and inclusion side of things slightly for a minute, although it's a fantastic conversation and I could go on about that all day. To the other bit, just before COVID happened, I almost felt like a prophet because I'd written a piece about the changing face of offices, and I'd written a piece about rows of desks need to die, because actually I was beginning to see that kind of just didn't work necessarily. And one of the things that COVID showed was that people, if they then went home to work, could find those spaces. A lot of people could find those spaces really quite good in terms of doing functional grunt work. Right? They're not so good for other things, but for focusing in on a task, you're filling in a spreadsheet, you're cutting and pasting from here to there. I mean, arguably, nobody should be doing that these days, but unfortunately, not everyone's caught up with AI and automation. So, but for things like that, it works really, really well. I can focus. There are some people would struggle to focus at home, but that sort of thing's fine. It became very, very clear that if people found that they could do that kind of work remotely, that when they came into the office, they weren't wanting the same experience again, because who would want to come in to an office space to then sit in a cubicle where you're not talking to anybody, do the grunt work and just go home again? You might as well stay at home to do that. Yeah. So that must have really changed the way that people then start having an expectation about office space around. Has it moved as much as perhaps we imagine it has, or are management still wanting office space and home space to kind of look the same in terms of working area? How much has it actually changed, so that have people really kind of fully bought into that whole idea of actually, if we're going to get people if they're going to work hybrid, so if they're going to work between home and they're going to work in an office, what we do in an office space, let's make that office space perhaps a little bit more exciting in terms of the types of activity that we can do in that office space that you wouldn't be able to do at home. Let's build it around communication, team building, training exercises, customer experience, all of those sort of things. The stuff that you can't really do over Zoom effectively. How much of that's changed?
I think it really depends on the both the sector that we're talking about, and also the sector and perhaps also the size of the organisation or the size of the building as well. So, working with a big client recently, who are a big international client, I could see a very positive trend in their larger offices, where they're making a real effort to create lots of different spaces and not have formal rows of workstations, generally ticking a lot of the boxes that we're just talking about. Go off to one of their smaller offices and there's just the rows of desks that historically we see. And I think they for them, they're sort of facing a challenge where they're prepared to spend the money at the larger buildings, but perhaps less so for some of their smaller, more regional sites. And it's tied in with the whole employment thing. So if you're trying to attract bright young things, you're trying to attract graduates in, you're that sort of organisation where that's really important for you, then you're in competition with other companies that are really laying on some. I mean, I went to one yesterday. I walked in. I just thought, I love it. It's just a gorgeous office. I'd like to work here. And there were lots of different types of spaces. Everything had clearly been thought through very, very carefully, and that would work really well as I was looking at it. And then that same organisation, if they had a small office in Aberdeen or Swansea or something, you probably wouldn't get quite the same feel. And it's that sort of thing can take quite a bit of time. If you've got offices all over the country, to roll out this, this is what we've done in our largest office in London or Manchester or wherever. It takes quite a bit of time to then replicate that. And I think that, as I say, with the space element as well, where you might not have the space in a smaller building to actually achieve what you're doing at some of your larger buildings.
Do you know what? Again, that makes sense. It really does make sense what you're saying. And actually, I used to see that at workplace adjustment level, because if I went into the flagship office of a large organisation, that part of the look and feel of that office was, trying to show the outside world the culture of that organisation.
Yeah.
It was like, this is our culture, this is our ethos, etc., etc. But then, as you say, you travel to one of their smaller little depots or whatever, and sometimes that creates a little bit of a bitterness, and it can manifest itself in, you mentioned your guy with the service desk problems. It can manifest itself in a bit of that, where it's like, well, yeah, I went to head office the other week and look, they've got everything. Look what I've got here. I've got a rubbish chair. I've got a rubbish desk. I've got and it's that's difficult, because you've got to understand that, they may not have the money or the infrastructure or whatever to suddenly put that everywhere. It may not be feasible for them to put that everywhere. It might not even work.
They could. So a classic scenario is that one of those buildings might be, there's 2 years left on the lease, and then we're going to be moving to a new location. So for the next 2 years, tough. You're just going to stick with everything that's there, and it's not terribly pleasant. But why would we spend money on it? We're going to be moving shortly. So I think that's another factor. And yes, there'll be the budgets that will be available. They're going to first of all go to the prime locations, aren't they?
Question then. One of the things I've often thought about here is, do some businesses own too much real estate? And with what we've learned, do we need some businesses to think? I mean, we've had sort of rented office accommodation for pretty much forever. But do some businesses actually need to swallow a bit of pride and maybe think about how we could turn this building that we've got into more of a shared space? Because it seems to me that with more people working hybrid, there may be more opportunities if we get the right technology to help us do it and manage it, and the right people to help us do it and manage it, to have it as a shared space, to have people utilizing the same building over different days of the week, or different groups using different bits at different times. If we get it right, it's just a thought.
So obviously we're seeing some organisations that they're going one way or the other. So such as HSBC and Clifford Chance in London, downsizing from the big buildings they're in to smaller office buildings, largely because of hybrid working, but also lockdown threw up the stats that people like myself had always known. So I'd done workplace utilisation studies, and very, very often I'd be coming out with a figure of about 58% occupancy as an average. Wow. Whereas the board were in their heads were thinking that they had about 85% occupancy, because they'd come in to the building, probably not first thing on a Monday morning or last thing on a Friday. And they would see lots of people sat at their desks. It'd be difficult to book a meeting room. They'd all be busy. And therefore the perception was that we're getting good use out of this space. And post-pandemic, where we've seen more hybrid working and people encouraged to work from home for a while, you have this different scenario where they then become very, very much aware of that 58%, which is then lower than it was, because typically lots of people aren't going in on a Monday and a Friday. And so you just have that peak middle piece of the week where yes, the office is actually being properly utilised, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But seriously, if you've got 12% occupancy on a Monday morning, you're paying a lot of money to be in a prime location and have it all functioning. I mean, that's the other thing. I'll go into a building. Well, we've got 4 floors here, but we might need 4 sometimes, but a lot of the time we only need 3. I mean, I'd argue, especially if you haven't got allocated workstations, you could say, well, on a Monday and Friday, we're only going to open 2 floors, and the other floors, we're just going to turn them off. And you need to think that through, because it might be all the meeting rooms are on one of those floors, so you still need the meeting rooms available. But it's a tricky one, because clearly we've seen some companies who are mandating return to the office, and others who recognise that hybrid working generally works quite well. And I've done this. I mean, why would I travel a long distance? Because all I'm going to do is sit in a room and be on Teams calls all day. And I could have done exactly that from home and saved the commute.
Twilo, I'd like to get your opinion on this bit. So, as people change the way that they work and interact with building, etc., so if we become more hybrid, is it reflective, or has it been reflective in the types of products that have been brought over the last couple of years? You may or may not know. Have we seen more people buying into product that they can take with them, if you like? Have we seen sort of an increase in mobile solutions, as it were? And then does that then solve the issue, or does it actually create another issue, which is that if people then have to move stuff around rather than be in a fixed location in an office space, do some people then just not bother with anything at all, because they've now got to carry something around? And then I can bring Bernard back into that. So then where does the business then fit with facilities, etc., fit into that? Which is, should we just make available sort of like lockers with here's like a set of equipment. You can go and just choose it, use it, clean it, put it back, etc. You don't have to carry it. It's mobile. You can choose where you work. You get the gist of my kind of question. But I'll start with you, Twyla.
No, absolutely. I think again, it goes back to that whole kind of macho culture where everyone is like, I need nothing. I'm strong. I don't. And everyone does need to sit properly at their desk and use their equipment properly. And the thing that you've seen is, the move from the desktop to the laptop. Mm-hmm. Even if people weren't using a laptop portably, you have a laptop sitting on your desk, and then you had a lock when you were putting that away. And whether or not that was the best idea or not, that is what happened. So laptops, their keyboard, the trackpad, and the screen were only ever meant to be temporary devices, not permanent devices. They're at the wrong level, they're in the wrong position, and continued use of them will cause problems for anyone ultimately, potentially. Doesn't have to. Just like some people, there's a guy in the States named George Burns. He's been smoking cigars forever and ever. He's about 1,000 years old. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he never got lung cancer, but most people would in that situation. So it's that kind of scenario. In response to that, there was a movement where you were getting what they call a laptop stand. And a laptop stand would raise the screen up to an appropriate height so that you didn't have to hunker down over it. And then you would use a keyboard with it and a mouse. There's been improvements on keyboards and mice. It's a whole thing that we could probably do a whole show on. But those laptop stands were very nice, but it was a separate piece of equipment. So if you're an employee and you have a laptop and you have a laptop stand, even if you love that laptop stand, sometimes you're going to forget it. One day you're going to lose it. And ultimately, when you go to leave the company, you're definitely going to forget to return it. You'll return the laptop, but not the laptop stand. So then facilities or procurement have to buy another one. The thing that's happened in recent years is now we have laptop stands that actually attach to the laptop. They weigh less than a kilo, so not even I can complain about carrying it with my dodgy shoulder. And all these ladies with these beautiful manicures, they can't even chip their manicure opening it and closing it. So it's a no-brainer to use. And when you leave the company or whatever, you return the laptop stand is attached. You get your laptop stand back. You don't have to buy another one. So it's a really very good system that encourages people to do the right thing. You can't force people to do the right thing, but you can encourage them. So there are lots
of things. Make it easier. Yeah.
Make it easier. Make it less complicated. And once people start using it, because they're so much more comfortable, they will make the effort, because it's not a lot of effort. But it's not our first primary. Our first primary thing is I need nothing. I can work. I can do this. And they do that. So that's one small kind of thing that has happened, which is good.
Yeah, so Graham, in answer to your question, a lot of organisations have gone for having one or two screens on desks, and then people come in with their laptop, with their company laptop, and connect up to those screens. So there's a good element to it, but they are still, using a laptop and not without a laptop stand, Twyla, generally, and probably still using the touchpad. They may or may not have a mouse. And so you're certainly not getting an ideal scenario in that type of situation. Typically in those organizations, because they've gone for non-allocated workstations, they will have introduced lockers. And in theory, that's where you could keep some of those items. Although I'm inclined to think that most people are going to keep their sports kit for the gym, or a spare umbrella, or something of that nature. They come into the office and they've just got the things that you used to keep in the bottom drawer of your pedestal now move across to the, because there's no more pedestals, it just moves across to the locker instead. So Twyla and I have an event next Wednesday about ergonomics and hybrid working, and we've just described one of those scenarios there where you could have a perfect setup at home. you've got to set up in the office, but it isn't perfect because you're coming in with the laptop, connecting it to those screens. That bit's good, but then you're still sat. You've got a good office chair that you're sat in, but you're still not working at the correct angle in the scheme of things. So that's where a potential problem from hybrid working comes in, which people aren't going to think about. Someone, if I'm the same as everyone else, I guess. I take my laptop somewhere to work with a client, and yes, I'll hook it up so I can get it onto two screens or a bigger screen. But I'm not actually. Yes, I don't actually lug the the laptop standing around with me, or the mouse, and so I'm guilty. I'm guilty as well. So there's definitely an issue there, and I feel that this hasn't been thought through terribly well by organisations because we're still in a bit of a state of flux, aren't we? Well, people are in the office maybe 2 days a week. We're going to encourage them to come in maybe three. It hasn't really settled down. There's still a PwC. I mean, they had a press release last week about return to the office, return to the workplace, and there's been a lot of publicity about civil servants. Well, in reality, there aren't enough desks for them because property was sold off. It was based on we don't need to provide 100 desks for 100 civil servants because some of them are working from home or they might be on holiday or on off sick or whatever. So we can shrink our estate, save some money, and if you tell them all they've got to go back, on a Monday morning, there'll be people standing there saying, well, I haven't got every workstation's taken, I haven't got anywhere to work. And that would be worse because then they're going to go to the nearest coffee shop or squat on in a small breakout space or something, and they'll be definitely not sitting properly. So I think there's just a bit of a we're still in a time of change in terms of where people are working and what is considered acceptable or not. And you said it yourself earlier on, Graham, and I'm totally with you on this. Some people adapt to working from home really well and probably work a lot harder than they would in the office because they don't get the interruptions. And there are some people who struggle with it, and they'll be at home and I'll just it's a nice day. I think I'll just mow the lawn and take the dog for a walk, and they're just readily distracted all the time, and they need to be in the office and have that formality of sitting somewhere with their colleagues. But I also think we all need an element of that. I think we all need to go into the office and meet with people we work with. And you've lost that if you're just doing Zoom and Teams calls. You are. I always find that I wish there was like a little 10 minutes at the end where we've finished the official call. Oh, by the way, how is your partner? Are they getting better now? And how was your holiday? And that little bit of chit chat, which actually then will lead into, oh, did you know that we've got a problem with such and such, and we need to, I wasn't going to mention it in the call, but it's a business, an organisational thing. We probably need to talk about it. I was going to send you an email, but it's easier to ask, face to face, as it were. So I value the face to face. I think that's really important. But I think we can have a blend of both that works.
We've lost Twyla just for a minute, but we're trying to get her back. Apparently, camera can't get back on. Which is, look, this is a demonstration of why sometimes it's good to work face to face rather than remotely. I've a lot to unpack there from what you said, but one of the main things for me is you mentioned it, and I could come into any organisation and talk about this at length, which is we just need to understand time better and people's time. I was still doing workplace assessments when COVID hit, and I was seeing so many people burning out because of one Zoom call after another being scheduled. We hadn't really understood how to take what we would do normally during a day in an office space and put that online. There are natural breaks that happen in an office space because you physically have to traverse from one place to another. You can see the movement, so therefore you don't expect someone just to be there again. And suddenly when we put something online, it was like we expected someone to just be there 24 hours a day. So we really, and we're still kind of reeling from that. I don't think we're I don't think we really understand quite how to do that. And one of the things I think organizations really need to get clued up on is when we give people information or get them involved in the communication and information exchange, etc., which is what happens when we're online on Zoom or whatever with someone. We need to give people a time for just the social interaction, but also we need to give them time to think. Because otherwise they've got no time to process what they've just been through. And actually, if we want them to do something useful with that information, then we need to just give them time to my mum and dad used to call sit and twist your noodle or ponder your noodle, but you know what I mean. You need to sit and ruminate over it and go, oh right, okay, so we've been thinking about this. What does that mean? What am I, what should my action points be out of that? And if we don't, and we're straight into the next piece of work, something's going to go amiss there. And that's, I used to talk about it when I used to come in and do assessments with people in offices. Was another thing culturally that I used to see quite a lot was a manager would step up to somebody's desk to try and have a meeting with them. And I used to call it a micro meeting, because actually they'd step up and then they go, oh, Jeff, can I just talk to you about something? And Jeff would be busy, like, he's in the middle of a spreadsheet. He's got emails coming in or whatever. He's not turning away from any of that. So it's kind of like, yeah, oh, yeah. And partly that. And so actually the attention is split over both things.
Yeah.
Right. And we need to learn that where communication fails, if that bit of information is important, start the whole thing by saying, Jeff, can we have a conversation about something? Finish what you're doing there. Then when you're ready, get up, let's go over there. Let's talk eyeball to eyeball about it. So you're listening and you're engaged and we are communicating properly about this. Otherwise we get those scenarios like, did we talk about that? I can't remember. Of course you can't remember, because you were busy doing this, not that.
Yeah.
So, I think, how we design our offices, but as more importantly, then how we educate people as to how to use those spaces and how to understand how other people might use those spaces differently from us. They might think in a different way from us. All of that education piece is absolutely vital for us to get the most out of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And the final piece I was going to say today, and I'm so, Twyla is there. I can bring her back in. There we go. Hello. I'm glad you could make it back for the final hurrah. The last thing I was going to say is, in terms of that bit about getting people to use things as well, and Stephen and I have talked about this before on WOW, I think one of the things we need to do is we need to engage with those brands and those, if you like, influencers in society now who are getting people's attention, right? And I'm going to say this to Bernard. I mean, Bernard must have, over the years, you must have worked in buildings where they've had a gym, right?
Yes.
And, the company would set up a gym and they'd set up a gym membership and whatever else. And there'd be a tiny percentage of people that would actually use it, right? And you wouldn't get anyone to use it. And it's not providing those facilities that gets people to use it. It's taken the likes of companies like, and I am going to mention the name, but it's taken the likes of companies like Gymshark or whatever to make gym culture cool, right?
Mhm.
That have got people to use gyms, right?
Yeah.
And in a way, I think it's about companies kind of embracing, let's be savvy and look, oh, that brand's doing this and they're achieving this, etc. They're causing people to use something. Think about it in terms of how Apple, for example, have always sold their products. Right? You're not a phone user. You're an Apple user. You're an iPhone user, or you're this user. Right? What they do is they make it cool you become cool by association to use their product. Right? And that is done by social influence, cues, and everything else. Right? So
I've run into a really cool app that a potential client has run into, and it's called the Hero app or something like this. I don't remember the exact name, but what they do is you can basically take your wellness or your corporate social responsibility, and you gamify it, and you're like, okay, you can earn points if you donate to your community. You can earn points if you use our gym, if you eat an apple a day or whatever, and so they're actually encouraging behavior that may not be directly related to the job, but actually reinforces brand, reinforces behavior. If you do this at your desk, if you sit properly, if you have, however. And I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I thought it was a really clever way to ensure that the behaviors you want your employees to feel comfortable with, that they feel comfortable doing without forcing them to. They can engage or not, depending on their time frames, their personality, their demands on their life. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just about expanding on that, because I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I've been into office spaces in London where inside that office space, the coffee shop that would have been once upon a time the sort of self-run coffee shop, with Jane making you a cup of tea. There you go. Or whatever, or Jack. It's now a Costa or a Starbucks or one of the bigger names or whatever, and it just fits into it's kind of blended lifestyle. It's part of what you see on the outside, but now it's on the inside of work as well. And I just think it's about businesses maybe bringing more of those brands in that have done the work in terms of the awareness and the culture piece, and they've got the buy-in, bringing them into their spaces to go, right, we want you in our space so that actually we can use you to change culture in the building. What do you think on that, Bernard, just to finish off today?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that concept, the concept which it was originally created by the Swedish airline SAS in Stockholm years and years ago, of having a street, and everyone working in that building, you came down to the street and you've got coffee outlets, you've got different food outlets, and it's been a progression from that as the original one. Where you have a building which, as you say, has a branded coffee outlet, possibly has a brand, other sort of recognizable food brands perhaps, and maybe also a branded gym. And it's kind of bringing the home working experience to the office, isn't it? So that, for instance, I couldn't go out now and say, well, I'm going to go to my nearest Pret or Costa or whatever, to get my lunch or to buy a coffee, but I can replicate that in the office rather than Mabel trundling on the corridor with her stewed tea that used to exist. Yeah, she always gets the blame. And so yeah, it's just kind of replicating the outside experience. And GlaxoSmithKline, I mean, they're relocating, but I was so impressed with their building where they've got the street concept. They said, you can have everything in this building. You can have, your shopping delivered to your car. You can have flowers delivered if it's your partner's birthday or something, again to your desk or your car. There's a dentist, there's a doctor, there's a bike repair facility. So if you cycle in, you can get your bike fixed while you're working. And I think I'm trying to remember what was missing. I think it was a lawyer. I think if you were going through a messy divorce or something, there was no lawyer on site. But it's pretty much, you come into the office and everything that you could do from home, you could send your dry cleaning out. Everything you could do at home, you could do in the office. And that's an interesting concept, which some organisations have. I mean, in some instances, there's some law firms in London that have a concierge, and you speak to the concierge in the morning. You say, hi Joe, I'm going to a function later this week. Can you send this my DJ out to be dry cleaned? And he'll get that done for you, and it'll be back at your desk the next morning. And it's just having that sort of replicating that sort of experience, hotel or home experience in the workplace, which arguably has got to encourage people back, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a brilliant chat. Thank you so much for coming and joining with us today. Twyla, thank you for setting this up and taking part as well. Folks, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please do connect with both Twyla and Bernard on LinkedIn. I'm sure that they'd be pleased to have a conversation with you further. And also, do you want to mention the event one more time? Just so that,
yes, so next Wednesday evening in Clerkenwell, we've got an event about hybrid working and ergonomics, and we'll be touching on quite a few of those things we talked about today. A really exciting panel of 4 experts. Myself and Twyla will be there, and yes, if you come onto our LinkedIn pages, we'll make sure we've got the link for you to book a place.
That's brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. I hope you've had a good week, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.